just the news that's come out in the last couple weeks is phenomenal. So I have no clue what's going to happen with the Judiciary Committee subpoenaing the NSA over spying. It's absolutely phenomenal. So I was thinking of a list of some of the things that we have not received from in regard to 9/11, because, as I said before, a lot of people have been told that the commission investigated. First there was the joint congressional inquiry, and then there was the commission that the family members said, look, that wasn't enough. We've got to ask the really, really hard questions. The mandate of the 9/11 Commission was to assess, I wish I had this memorized exactly, but basically assess the errors that had been made, proving that assuming that the official story was accurate. 19 guys with box cutters took over the planes, and we had no warning. We couldn't have imagined that they would ever use airplanes as missiles, and that's what we were told. So really the commission set about to show how we failed in stopping that from happening, but really it was showing that what the government had told us was true. So they didn't ask questions outside of the government story. The whistleblowers that came forward during that, the eyewitnesses who had been in the towers, Sibel Edmonds, who had been a translator for the FBI, there were apparently hundreds of people who gave testimony to the 9/11 Commission that's not in the report. So the report, which was actually written by Philip Zelikow, who previously wrote a book with Condoleezza Rice. Okay, so there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there. They wrote this book, and then they had it published, and Americans bought it up, and it's the narrative, according to them, of what happened. But what was left out of that book? And one of the things is all of this evidence from whistleblowers. So we hear a lot in the media, if you guys' theory held any water, people would have talked. Well, you know what? People have talked. Hundreds of people talked to the commission. Hundreds of people have talked to the media since then. The USA Today actually did a 4-page spread on whistleblowers last fall, sometime right before Christmas, talking about 4 whistleblowers, 2 of them were at the FBI, what they had gone through, how they had lost their jobs, what has happened to them since then. People have talked, and they would like to talk more. Sibel Edmonds, who is an FBI translator, who has seen evidence of APAC, American Turkish Council, highest levels of Project for New American Century members of the U.S. government, and others being involved at least in the financing, and what she's insinuating is a lot more than that. After Sibel gave her testimony, her testimony, her resume, her social security number were retroactively gagged by Ashcroft. So Sibel Edmonds is not actually allowed to pass out a resume because it has some of her information on it, but that's gagged by the FBI. And it was so bad with her case that when she had her hearing, which she finally had a hearing, actually the day of her hearing, a piece of the facade of the Supreme Court fell off and crashed to the ground. I thought that was really ironic. Literally. Nobody was hurt, but it was interesting. The day of her hearing, she and her attorney were asked to leave the court because even they couldn't hear the information in her case for part of the day. So this is how much is being kept from us, and we don't really know what that is. Sibel Edmonds, I use her name as an example because she has given quite a bit of information, and she's really come right up to the limit of being able to say, you know, what she knows without actually being able to name names. But she's saying members at the highest levels of the American government have been involved in this, and I have evidence of it. Well, there are other people who have had that evidence too, and so they're gagged and they can't speak. So if we don't have transparency on 9/11 and we're not allowed to know what happened on 9/11, then we're going to continue to buy the story. We, the American people, are going to continue to buy the story because it's really hard to look at this. It really is. I mean, if we just stop and think about it, most people don't want to believe that their government is hurting them. They might believe that their government is big and bungling and doesn't manage money and doesn't really get services to people, and gosh, look how they screwed up with Katrina, and what do you expect? But to really look at, would somebody consciously allow this to happen? We had FBI agents who lived across the street from the hijackers before 9/11. I know there are some people who don't believe that there were hijackers on 9/11, but we did have an awful lot of evidence of FBI agents and other whistleblowers who were following them around the country, including Mossad agents who were following them around the country. So clearly there was a plan to hijack airplanes. And I really am not going to address the rest of that. Some people believe things like there weren't even any planes on 9/11. Clearly, I believe that there were planes, that they were hijacked and hit the buildings. Did they have control over the planes? Who actually masterminded it? We all have lots of questions about all that. And why do we have questions about all that? As I'm pointing at my laptop that you can't see, is because they haven't released these documents. They haven't released the rest of the information. So the August presidential daily briefing that they were talking about, bin Laden determined to strike in the United States, and they redacted most of it. And they said originally, oh, it was just historical data, we didn't really pay any attention. No, it wasn't. It was specific with dates and targets in there. We had received warnings from 12 other countries that this was going to happen, including very specific things in there. Why can't we know that? The minutes of the August meeting, we heard that former CIA Director Tenet basically insisted on a meeting with Condoleezza Rice in August, that it was so urgent right now, stop your stinking vacation and meet with us, drove to the ranch, flew in, whatever they do. We can't see what that was. We can't know what was so urgent that he had to bust in there. Well, we know what was so urgent. We were having specific warnings about exactly what was going to be happening on 9/11, and yet nothing was happening with it. So you've got FBI agents, we've got 12 other countries, we've got hundreds of individuals with whom I've talked. I just get these calls because of being an executive director who go, you know, I tried to go to the FBI. I knew these guys. I met them in Phoenix, or I was at this place. I've had hundreds of calls like that. And every one of those people, which I don't track them all down and I know all these people are valid, every one of them says, I called the police, I went to the FBI, they said, don't call. There's nothing we can do with this. Or, in fact, if you call us anymore, we're going to charge you with harassment. Has happened to a lot of people. So now the Jersey Girls have, which is the 4 women who were widowed on 9/11, have, and I mentioned earlier in the presentation their report of the commission report. They have a petition online now, which has just reached 15,000 signatures, and they took it back to court. And what they're asking for is the release of these documents that we're talking about. The CIA Inspector General's report, which proved what the CIA's, or determined what the CIA's accountability was on 9/11, has never been released. The 28 redacted pages of the Judiciary Joint Inquiry that talk about the funding, and the funding which the Commission told us ultimately is of no concern. Who financed 9/11 is not of any concern to us, so we'll just continue to do our business with Saudi Arabia and Turkey and whomever else because it's of no concern. So those questions have got to be released. I mean, the answers to those questions, which a lot of them have already come out. We have the answers to them. We're just not allowed to see them. So the question is, if we don't get through any transparency, if we don't get any transparency related to 9/11, which was clearly the defining moment of America in the last long time, since Gulf of Tonkin, which now we know actually didn't happen either. I mean, the National Security Archives have released the documents that it was absolutely fabricated, and that's the event that started the Vietnam War. Remember the Maine? There's tons of evidence that that was fabricated. The USS Liberty that was shot by Israel, the survivors were shot and blown up knowingly, and that information, they just had their 40th anniversary. You know, Pearl Harbor, I think there are an awful lot of questions about it. I don't... Yeah. And Gulf of Tonkin, right? And anyway, Oklahoma City. There was... right, an Operation Northwoods, which was a plan put forward that we would hijack one of our own planes and crash it to make it look like Cuba did it so that we could attack Cuba. I mean, and that fortunately didn't ever come to pass because John Kennedy said, are you out of your mind? And, you know, well, John Kennedy died.